Good afternoon, everyone. It's Thursday afternoon, I guess May 1st, May Day. I'm recording this in my office. You can see the pictures from behind me as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing this past week, maybe a little bit about the assignment for the future as well. But first, talk about the readings and the many discussions. I've been in a number of Chevrutot this week, and I've read carefully your postings. All of it has been quite fascinating. All of it has been quite interesting. Your comments have been quite insightful. I've really enjoyed reading through them as we get to things which are sort of closer to our time, closer to our issues. History of antisemitism, the development of nationalism, the development of Judaism in the modern period. All of these are still issues which are still very much around for us today. So they have a different kind of resonance for us. Some comments and musings about this, and just to share some things, particularly in one of the Chevrutot with today with Michael and Josh. The point was made that the questions of Count Mollet and the responses offered by the French rabbis revolved around the issue of Judaism as a religion, as opposed to Judaism as a nation. We've talked about that in a number of contexts, but sort of came out more clearly and explicitly this morning. The French people wanted reassurance that Jews and Judaism owed no allegiance to a nation of the Jews, that they were a religion just like Christianity. So even though Catholicism is is certainly a religion among the Christians, there is a kind of national character to it, an authority structure with the Pope and so on. People get worried about that. So they were a little bit worried about the Jews. What are they? Are they like us in terms of religion or not? So in many ways, the response of the rabbis was to reassure them that indeed Jews and Judaism functioned almost entirely as a religion, and they had nothing to be worried about. This particular way of thinking about Judaism in the diaspora, in the exile, in the Tutsot, as we say, had a tremendous imprint on Jews from then, and then continuing. The national identity of the Jews was suppressed somehow, and the religious identity of the Jews was somehow encouraged. And that continued in France and Germany and also in the United States. That national identity of the Jews is somewhat of an embarrassment sometimes, the particularistic idea, this communal idea, and so on. And Jews continue to try to play with both of them. What was found was that, in fact, what's so interesting is that in fact, in France, this was not true, that the Jews were just a religion. And in many ways, what happens, and the disappointment of the French, related to the fact that by the end of the 19th century, into the 20th century, Jews were still hanging around as Jews. They held fast to their Jewish identity, even when their religious beliefs were no longer so strongly held. Why else didn't they all convert to Christianity? Was it because of what they believed or who they were? Was there really such a powerful set of beliefs, even in this country? Do people so powerfully believe in the truths of the religion of Judaism? There is something about Jewish beliefs that is comfortable for people, that they perhaps would not want to be Christians, but still there is something about Jewish identity that is national, that is communal, that is biological, that is not related to what's going on in your head only. So I would say that the problem was not a problem that didn't in fact exist in one way or the other. There was something different about them. The problem was in the expectations, I think, of the French people. They could certainly be fully functioning French citizens and at the same time be French Jews who are part of the Jewish people. But it is still hard for non-Jews to understand that. And it's still hard even today. You belong to the Jewish nation or the American nation. How do you do this? Well, you're Jewish religion, but is there some part of you that's identified with the people as well? How can you be part of two people? Actually, in this country nowadays, with multi-ethnic identities, I suppose it's not so hard for people to understand that. But throughout the 20th century and earlier, the Jews were viewed as kind of Luftmenschen, Luft meaning air. They had no place. They thought of themselves as having a place, but they had no place. They were people running around the world, living in different parts of the world, who were Luftmenschen, who just could move from place to place with no real loyalty. So what did that loyalty consist of? And there were people then who would say, well, the only loyalty they really have is to themselves as Jews. They were Jews who were both Germans and Jews, but could you be both? Or was your Germanness a sham? And were you under it all a Jew with loyalties only to the Jewish people? This concept was actually the basis of the protocols of the elders of Zion that said that Jews had this plot to take over the world. And even though it looked like they were part of the community around them, it looked like they were integrating, underneath it all they cared about was Jewish power. All they cared about was getting those Christians to give over their power to the Jews. And slowly but surely they were accomplishing that. That's what the protocols, that is the diaries, the minutes of the elders of Zion, when they would meet once every 100 years, they would sort of come together and see how well are we doing in our attempts to take over the world. We've got this, we have a lot of doctors, so doctors get into the most intimate moments of people, so we're very successful there. We have a lot of lawyers. We're gaining control of more and more land. We're gaining control of the workers, and so on and so forth, because the only loyalty they had was to themselves. Ultimately, this vision of the Jews was sold by anti-Semites and Hitler, so that Western and Eastern Europe bought the message that the Jews were undigestible, unintegratable. They had their own agendas, and they could never be loyal, and they were like a cancer in the midst of nation. And therefore, the only solution was the final solution, or the only solution originally was to separate, to segregate, to move them out, to evict, and ultimately, if you've studied the history of the Holocaust, ultimately it was not really what the original thought of Hitler was. He never thought he could do that, but ultimately the idea of the destruction, the annihilation of the Jews was something that he only thought possible later on. 41, 42 is not clear when this final solution was ultimately developed. So this kind of sense of Jewish identity and who is a Jew and what is a Jew and how it relates to the modern world forms the backdrop to the next section of the course, where we will be talking in the next few weeks about the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism and mostly about the Jewish responses to this. How do Jews respond to this, not just attempt, but how do they respond to the real facts that from a period of 1933 to 1945, there was an attempt to wipe out all the Jews in the world. And that attempt in Eastern Europe, at least, was mainly successful. And that they stood alone. They were a nation apart in the sense that the nations of the world couldn't care less about their situation. And there's stories about what America do, what did other people do, what did the Jews in this country do? We could talk about that as well. I have a different view than others. I think the Jews in this country should not be condemned for their behavior during those years, but that's a different topic. The question is, how do Jews understand their own distinctiveness? How do they understand their own uniqueness? How do they understand their own chosenness in many ways? What does that mean? We'll be reading a lot of materials. I have scanned for you 3 documents by 3 of the most important thinkers who respond to this: Richard Rubinstein, Emil Fackenheim, and Yitzhak Greenberg. Very different, at least Rubinstein from the others. And then you have this wonderful book, Wrestling with God, which you've already begun to read, which has an amazing number of responses to this from the ultra-Orthodox to those in Israel to those outside of Israel, in Europe, and the United States. Your final assignment, as I wrote, is going to be to try to pick one of those. I'd like you to read all three of the basic ones, but to pick either one of those or somebody else and reflect on your reading of this, their response to this problem of the Holocaust, the problem of evil, in the context of many of the questions that we have had throughout the course. So I think that it should be very interesting reading. I'm really, really excited about reading your responses to these materials. And I just have the sense, as I wrote in one of my postings, that you're so ready to come to terms with this material now, having read through from the biblical material all the way through up to the modern, different ways that Jews have responded to some of these questions. And now it will all come together as you read about how modern and contemporary Jews are responding to the issues that confront them today.